Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Ocean State Current Command Bunker. Now playing from in the dugout, number 37, Mike Stenhouse.
The government's assault on Rhode Island families continues. This time, the grim prospect of freezing in the dark. You know, Rhode Island already endures some of the highest electricity rates in the nation. And it's about to get much worse based on a new report that our center and other New England state think tanks put out earlier this week. You know, this is the path, tragically, freezing in the dark, that Rhode Island lawmakers have recklessly set Ocean State residents upon. What's the solution? Well, how about a simple first step? Let's repeal the electric vehicle mandate in our state. And a lot to talk about today. Once again, the Rhode Island media was missing in action. Once again, narrative trumps science. Once again, fiction trumps the truth. Hey, folks, welcome to In the Dugout. Your host, Mike Stenhouse here. You know, earlier this week, our think tank group put out, and this is a bunch of New England states that have fought everything from the TCI gas tax that you heard a lot about right before the pandemic. We fought together as a region to beat that. And now we've put out collectively, we all sponsored a report, The Staggering Cost of New England's Green Energy Policies. You can see that all of the six New England-based think tanks, in addition to the Americans for Prosperity Foundation, sponsored this report. We're going to get to the report in just a second, but it's important to put everything in context. So this is going to be a solo in the dugout today, no guest, just a commentary on the situation, on status, I should say, of energy in our state, this report and what it means for Rhode Island families and ratepayers. Look, we're in a world that's going to need far more energy, whether it's artificial intelligence that's going to require massive computing power and as other data centers grow, as we hopefully naturally move towards more electric vehicles, not through mandates. We're going to need more electricity there. And if we're trying to electrify so many other aspects of our society, which I don't agree with, but if that's where we're going, we're going to need a lot more electricity. But they want us to forget that fossil fuels are the best way to provide that energy. Energy is great, and fossil fuels work great for energy. But state lawmakers in New England, especially here in Rhode Island, say, well, we're going to throw all that out and go to something entirely new, entirely unaffordable, and entirely unattainable, and it doesn't provide enough electricity. You know, for centuries. And I'm quoting here, you know, a lot of this comments in the next few minutes are kind of summaries from an email I read earlier this week from Alex Epstein, who's been on this show as a guest. He's not a climate change denier. He admits climate change is happening. He doesn't believe it's catastrophic. He doesn't believe it's a crisis. But he also believes that fossil fuels are an important part, not just of our past, as is proven, but of our future. Fossil fuels have benefited our society and the development of global civilizations beyond comprehension. I mean, fossil fuels have made us so much more comfortable and survivable on our planet. And now, like I said, our state and other New England states, with their unsupported, unresearched, and arbitrary net zero targets, just to be the first in the country, whoop-de-doo. But we're going to get to some of the implications of that in a second. But with their reckless net zero targets, New England states are seeking to abandon fossil fuels like they're some kind of plague, and they are not. Yes, maybe fossil fuels impact the climate a little bit, but it's certainly not catastrophic. Climate change may be real, but we're not facing the doomsday climate crisis that the alarmists have been falsely predicting for about the last 4 to 5 decades. The truth is, climate-related disaster deaths are at all-time lows. And over those same 4 to 5 decades that we've been hearing doomsday scenarios, climate change deaths have rapidly declined over that same period because it's our ability as a society, uh, with technology, with improvements in developing fossil fuels and using them and with less carbon emissions, it's because of our ability to master fossil fuels and master climate that we don't have to be as worried about it as a lot of people want you to think. As Alex Epstein actually said, quote, we're actually in a climate renaissance, as in human beings have never had a safer and more enjoyable relationship with their surroundings, end quote. So in the end, none of the concerns expressed by these climate alarmists and with the policies followed by our government are enough to put Rhode Islanders at risk of freezing in the dark. But this is actually what Ocean State lawmakers have done. So here we've come up with a little bit of a graphic here. This is a family. It's the same family you saw. We're going to show you that in a minute. Same family you saw that's underneath the tidal wave of left-wing policies that are assaulting Ocean State families. Well, this same family, because of the reckless policies of our state politicians, and now literally will be at risk because of the report we put out, which I'll get to in a few minutes, of freezing in the dark. I want you to think about that, folks. Freezing in the dark. All right. That's the scenario our report says Rhode Islanders might have to look at. So here is that other report we put out earlier this year that got a lot of attention, the government's assault on Ocean State families. And here is that graphic of that family under the tidal wave after tidal wave of extremist policies that are threatening the prosperity of working class families. We talked about how the government's assault is impacting Ocean State families patriotically, emotionally, religiously, physically, culturally, educationally, and of course, most importantly, economically. And within the economic side of things, the assault includes is energy. That's part of the economic crunch. I mean, inflation, housing, but energy. And energy is one of the ways that our government is assaulting the budgets of Ocean State families. The priority of government is to keep its people safe and in America to allow for its prosperity. When it comes to energy, the goal of government should be to secure low-cost, abundant sources of energy for the people of Rhode Island, not to reduce carbon emissions to the detriment of the affordability and availability of energy. But yet that's exactly what is going on in Rhode Island and other New England states. Our electric grid is the provider of all electricity. And we are already facing enormous supply and reliability problems. A couple Christmases ago, you might remember the cold snap we had. Were it not for one whole section of the grid going down because of a failure, we would have had a brownout in this state of Rhode Island. On some of the coldest days of the year, a couple of years ago, we would have not had enough electricity for every Rhode Island family and business. And the problems are only get worse if we stay on this doomsday path that lawmakers have put us on. We currently heavily rely on natural gas. Wind and solar provide very minimal parts of our electricity right now. But yet the natural gas pipeline system, which is a choke point for Rhode Island and much of America to derive its energy from on its electric grid, it's being choked off. We got states and we got local governments just denying and stopping the expansion of natural gas, which in Europe they've rated it because of its low emissions. In Europe, they're calling natural gas a green energy right now. But yet here in America, here in Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New York, nope, no natural gas expansion. It's by far the fastest scaling way we have of increasing energy production in general and electricity production overall, but it's bottlenecked by state laws and bottlenecked by inefficient pipelines. So if you saw our policy our report, I should say, is it's entitled "The Staggering Costs of New England's Green Energy Policies." We're going to get into that soon, and part of that is because we have ignored the obvious answer, which is pipeline expansion. Natural gas is abundant, it's low cost, it's affordable, and it's low emission, so it's very green friendly. But yet, politicians are stuck on the narrative. Look, a clean environment, clean air, clean water, we all want that. Nobody wants to diminish that. But we've got to, again, face reality. New England is responsible for less than 4% of global emissions. Rhode Island, probably 1/20th of that, 0.08% of global emissions. There's nothing we can do in this state, nothing that's going to change the overall climate change or global warming calculation. And then just look at it from a practical point of view. I mean, just think of the problems we've had with a few dozen wind turbines off our coast or some of the ones on land, some of the solar problems. Just think of all the clear cutting of forests. Think of the on land. Think of the obvious, what we've all seen, the destruction of marine life, the pollution of the waters, the local outrage we've had, over the massive electric transition lines that need to go under our beaches and shores. The outrage from local residents over that. Again, like I said, the dead marine life, the dead birds, the broken wind turbine blades that are seeping toxic materials into our oceans and upon our shores. Now imagine that's just with a few dozen. Now imagine the 6,600 offshore wind turbines and 5,600 onshore wind turbines that would be needed in the next couple of decades to create the electricity that New England is going to require. Imagine that. Imagine the problems with just a few dozen. Now multiply that by about 500. Okay, 500 or 600. It's unimaginable. But here's what is imaginable. Here's what will happen. Here's what our report says. Doubled electricity rates for the average family. 51,000 in additional costs for every person in our state by 2050 if we stay on this same net zero, arbitrary, unresearched path. I want you to imagine, again, freezing in the dark, because that's what we're heading for. You can't afford it. That's why it's dark. And there might not be enough electricity on the grid during a blackout or brownout, which means you'll be freezing. That's where we're headed, folks. That's what our report says. And this is exactly what Ocean State lawmakers, or the path that Ocean State lawmakers have set us upon. And it's beyond freezing in the dark. As prices go up of energy and reliability goes down, there's just going to be more and more families and more businesses and more investors and wealthy people and average middle-class families who are going to flee our state. It's been going on. We've been replacing, you and I know the truth, even though nobody will admit it. We've been losing college graduates. We've been losing many families, many business owners, many entrepreneurs to other states that have less regulatory, tax, and energy, less restrictive energy policies. And we've been replacing them, honestly, with a lot of non-productive people, whether they're illegal immigrants or not, who are looking for some of the many handouts we have in this state. The truth is, let's take a look at the issue I mentioned at the top, electric vehicle mandates. All right. Not only do people not want to buy the cars, and not only can't car dealers and automobile dealers sell them. We've had those guests on this year. We had Chris Hurd from the Rhode Island Automobile Association on earlier this year. But electric vehicle mandates will artificially increase the demand for electricity and put more pressure on a grid that right now does not have the capacity to handle that increased demand. This, folks, is what I call a self-inflicted wound created by our own government, where you, the families, pay the price. You may not have electricity for your car. You may not have electricity for your lights and other items at home, and you may not have electricity to heat your homes during those cold winter nights. Now, New Hampshire is the one New England state that has resisted this narrative, this false narrative of climate crisis, and has not imposed this green fantasy and these problems on its residents. And I'm hoping to have one of our coalition partners from New Hampshire on our show next week to contrast New Hampshire policy and Rhode Island policy. But trade-offs matter. We have to understand the pros and cons. We have to be realistic about it. If we want a sane green energy policy, or sane energy policy, as I say, probably shouldn't be a green energy policy. If we want sane energy policy in this state, we have to consider the pros and cons. Rhode Island lawmakers only consider one side of that. They don't do an honest cost versus benefit analysis. If not, they would see some of the results that you're going to hear about in just a minute from our report. And not only the high costs of electricity on this current path that we're on in Rhode Island, but motorists and residents will be denied their choice. Well, do I want to have natural gas heat or electric heat? Nope, government says you can only have natural gas. Do I want to have a combustible engine car, automobile that burns traditional gasoline and fossil fuels? Or will I be mandated only to buy electric vehicles? Now, of course, that electricity still has to come from somewhere. So they're robbing us of choice. It's an American hallmark that we have freedom of choice. We'll live our lives as we choose. So, despite all the facts of reality that are out there that we all now see and that our report highlight, despite the high costs of renewable energy, despite its unreliability, despite the ocean pollution from offshore wind, despite the marine life deaths and the bird deaths, the wildlife deaths from onshore wind and solar, despite the findings in our report, despite the fact that electricity rights are going to become unaffordable and unavailable, and electricity might become unavailable, leading to brownouts or blackouts, the green energy fanatics in our state, and that includes our governor, includes all the leadership in our General Assembly, and pretty much all members of the General Assembly, and certainly includes all of the bureaucrats appointed to head the related environmental agencies. The green energy fanatics in our government just keep plowing straight ahead. Look at this. Look at this press release from last week from the Rhode Island government. Cheering, we're the first state in America to launch the infrastructure of electric vehicle chargers. And it goes on and on. We're also the first state in the country to have a net zero emissions goal by the year 2050. We'll also be the first state in the union where you'll be freezing in the dark. That's what I mean by trade-off. Does that make sense for most Rhode Island families? Yes, we're going to be the first to do this when it comes to setting green energy targets, but we'll also be the first to put our residents at risk of freezing in the dark. And then there's another factor that again, these climate crazies in our state won't take into consideration. We got a new president coming in, Donald Trump. His views on it, clearly the views of the people that he's appointed or is going to nominate for his cabinet positions, everything is going to change. The federal electric vehicle mandates are going to go away. The federal subsidies for infrastructure, building, EV charging stations are going to go away. subsidies to buy, federal subsidies so the wealthy can buy and virtue signal and buy their electric vehicles, even though they don't work very well, especially up here in the winter, or especially when they're under any heat, cold, or towing stress. They're going to go away. Those subsidies everything's going to change. Everything is changing. The marine deaths show that the situation has changed from what they thought it was going to be a decade ago. But no, they don't care. They don't care what the reality is. They're going to push towards this. They're going to comply with this false narrative and just keep pushing, just like Governor McKee announced. How do you announce? I mean, just think about these subsidies for charging stations. When we had gas-powered cars, gasoline-powered cars, do we need federal subsidies to build gas stations? No. People wanted to drive gas-powered cars. We needed gas to fill those cars, and the free market, those gas stations popped up. The fact that the government has to fund and subsidize these EV charging stations is proof that the market doesn't demand it, that you're trying to force these vehicles and this infrastructure upon us. It can't work. It has never worked, and it won't work. So the idea, again, the point being, these climate alarmists, these government officials who are just completely won over by this false narrative. No matter what the truth is, you can't get them to change their tune. All right, so let's go on and let me give you a little summary of that report that I've been referencing here. And largely I'll be looking and giving you some notes from our media release on this and that we put out earlier this week. But again, this is a report. Americans for Prosperity Foundation was the lead sponsor. Also, each of the 6 other New England state-based think tanks, and there's our Center for Freedom and Prosperity right there, also were sponsors. But we put out this very well researched, very well documented report about what if we continue down this path of trying to achieve net zero emissions within the next few decades, what that staggering cost will be. And again, it's our Rhode Island. It's my term. It wasn't the report's term, but it's my term when I summarize everything that it could lead to freezing in the dark. That these state green energy mandates will double electric rates and cause rolling blackouts in the region. All right, get it? Freezing in the dark. Can't afford the electricity. Even if you can, it may not be available. And on those cold winter nights here in New England, we could be freezing in the dark. So as you know, Rhode Island was the first state, and they brag about it, even though they're bragging how they're going to lead us to destruction, to set a goal of zero emissions, carbon emissions by 2050. If you summarize all of the New England states, the average is 80% reduction in carbon emissions by 2050. And that was the basis on the report. That electricity rates will more than double. We'll have some rolling blackouts. And quite simply, the wind and solar, look, I have nothing against it. We should develop those. They shouldn't be subsidized, but as we get more efficient with the technology and as it can produce and store more energy, we'll use them more. There's nothing wrong with that, but we cannot rely on wind and solar to meet our regional demands for electricity. It just does not have that potential right now. And at some point, politicians have to understand that. The government, as I said to begin, the government's assault on ocean state families, just continues. Our politicians in the General Assembly and in the State House, again, have recklessly placed our state on a doomsday path. This report illustrates that lawmakers have done this without any cost-benefit analysis of their own, without any planning to expand our electric grid's capacity, And they've put us on this doomsday path. It's a self-inflicted crisis by our own government. It's a reckless scheme to follow a false narrative that puts Rhode Island families at serious risk. Now this report was commissioned, like I said, by the 6 think tanks and Americans for Prosperity. I want to name them all right here. We have the Americans for Prosperity Foundation. We have the Hosea Bartlett Center for Public Policy in New Hampshire. We have the Ethan Allen Institute in Vermont, the Fiscal Alliance Foundation in Massachusetts, the Maine Policy Institute, and of course, our own Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity, as well as the Yankee Institute in Connecticut. You know, compliance, if we stay on this path, compliance with New England's decarbonization plan, if you want to call it that, would cost a staggering 815 billion. That's 815 billion with a B through 2050. This will not only drive up the cost of energy, but it'll drive up the cost of everything. Pretty much everything we consume or buy at the store, because energy is a critical part of not only transporting, but storing and, you know, keeping cool or whatever. Everything or components within, you know, petroleum components within a lot of products. So everything is going to go up, and on a per capita basis, right? Now, so the cumulative cost, if you look at the cost of energy and the cost of all the second generation costs, you know, the transportation costs that go into the price of goods for pretty much everything else, we estimate that by 2030, the average family will pay an extra $2,000 in these costs. But get this, by 2040, it'll be $15,500 per family. And by 2050, almost $52,000 a year in extra costs for the average Rhode Island family. Actually, no, that's per capita. That's per capita. So if you figure a family of 3 or 4, you're talking a couple $100,000. This will clearly make New England more unaffordable and will only increase the exodus from our state. Again, we all want a clean environment, but switching to weather dependent, you know, does the wind blow, does the sun shine, which it doesn't always, switching to weather dependent, quote, green energy is just not feasible for the electric grid of New England. The study concludes that we put out that ISO New England, that's the group, ISO New England, that's the group who's tasked with ensuring that ensuring that we have enough energy to fuel our region, New England, and while doing so, complying with various state laws. So they have a tough task as state laws make it harder and harder. You know, I don't know, but that's the problem. It concludes that within 10 or 11 years, so by the middle of the 2030s, ISO New England probably will be unable to find enough electricity to power our region. So again, if each New England state adheres to the same renewable intensive path, we certainly could be facing blackout or brownout scenarios in addition to the high costs. I'm not going to get into some of the figures of how many gigawatts we need and all that stuff. That's in the report, but suffice it to say, wind and solar alone just simply cannot power New England. Now, we had a press conference on that, and let me see here. Yep, here we go. I'm just going to share this with you. But there was a press conference last week or earlier this week. Now, I was in New England. I was unable to participate in it. And I'm just skipping through here so you can see some of the people. That's Paul Craney from the Massachusetts group. There's Ross from the Americans for Prosperity. There's our New Hampshire counterpart. Here's our Maine counterpart here. And here's Giovanni Sicione, one of our board members. You may know the name. He spoke on my behalf since I was traveling out west. So thank you, Gio, for filling in. So again, we had a press conference last week. And you know what? media from every state participated in the press conference, was available to ask questions, took notes, wrote their reports. Well, every state except Rhode Island. What? Inexcusable. Rhode Island media, you've heard that, with the campaign and with, Trump fake news media. You've heard the assault on the mainstream corporate media, how they only follow the narrative and don't want to hear it, stick their heads in the sand for anything that doesn't fit the narrative. Rhode Island media is that here. Where was Channel 12? Where was Channel 10? Where was Channel 6? Where was Providence Business News? Where was Go Local Prov? Where was Public Radio, Ian Donis and such? Where was Matt Allen? Where was John DePietro? The only news source to cover this is what you're watching right now, us, the Ocean State Car. A report was put out that shows New England is on a doomsday path that could lead to freezing in the dark. Again, best way to and nobody in the Rhode Island media cared. Nobody in the Rhode Island media was courageous enough to go against the government and the mainstream narrative and to report to you the truth. This doomsday path that Ocean State lawmakers have set Rhode Islanders upon. That is disgraceful. The media in this state, the media in this country are one of the reasons why our society is spiraling out of control, because nobody will tell you the truth except us. So you got one group of people believe one set of false facts or false narratives, and you got another people who understand the truth and understand the facts. And that's why we're so divided. It is disgraceful what's going on. And we put out two media advisories. We put out and tagged people on social media, and not one Rhode Island media entity deigned to cover this life-altering, potentially life-threatening story and report that our think tank and others put out. All right. Like I said earlier, New England is responsible for less than 4% of global emissions. Rhode Island, probably like 0.08%. So how much? So by Rhode Island enacting these really radical net zero emissions policies, does anybody really think it's going to have any impact on the world and global warming? Did anybody do the research to find out, well, what would the, for virtually zero environmental impact? Is it really worth all these risks of high costs and brownouts and unavailability? Is it really? Has anyone done that and seriously consider that? No, they've just blindly forged ahead, and they continue to blindly forge ahead as if we're facing some kind of environmental disaster within the next few years. They've put forth these green energy policies, these politicians in the General Assembly, in the State House, Raimondo, Chafee, now McKee. They've put even Carcieri. They've put forth these plans without any effort to research the environmental benefits or the costs that these policies will impose on you and me and the people of our state. I think our report pretty much lays out that it's now a fact that New England states are imposing net harm on our economies and our people by imposing policies whose costs outweigh the benefits. We're artificially and exorbitantly increasing the cost of electricity. We're reducing its supply and availability to poorly balanced and unresearched and just hopeful reliance on renewable energy sources. And what we're looking at is many families are going to be facing that grim prospect of being unable to afford their electric bills or suffering from brownout and blackouts, unable to tap into unavailable electricity supply. So think of those cold winter freezing nights of freezing in the dark, all for any notable environmental benefit. Do you see what kind of twisted, backward policy our lawmakers have been setting us upon? And the media fails to report on it. They'll only cover the catastrophic pro-global warming reports or narratives, most of which are poorly researched, and most of which only support the climate alarmist narrative. They don't care about the truth. They don't care about reports like this. So what do we do about it? So let's look at some things from a public policy point of view. As our report illustrates, the charging of hundreds of thousands of EVs, if the mandates continue in our state, will likely overload our electrical grid. It will lead to electricity shortages. It'll lead to higher prices, and it could lead to freezing in the dark. Again, I'm going to keep saying that term because I think it works. Our state, Rhode Island's zero emissions strategy is unresearched, it's unaffordable, it's unattainable, and it's unsafe. Somehow, with your help spreading the word, this report must become a wake-up call to all lawmakers in our ocean state that we require a more reasonable energy strategy. Connecticut saw the writing on the wall and they abandoned its electrical vehicle mandate. Now it's time for Rhode Island to take the first step, the easiest step, to do the same thing, because it's the most ludicrous of all the green energy delusions, especially considering how under the incoming Trump administration, the federal mandates, the federal subsidies for EV purchases and for infrastructure development are going to disappear. Auto dealers are not going to be able to sell these cars without a mandate. And a mandate, as we've said, will kill the electric grid, will overload the electric grid. There simply is no justifiable reason for Ocean State lawmakers to continue their obeisance to California's electric vehicle mandate. That's what we do. We can either choose to follow federal guidelines or California's guidelines. Many years ago, Rhode Island chose to follow California's outrageous electric vehicle and emissions mandates, denying consumers choice, increasing the cost, and putting an unbearable strain on our region's electrical grid. So the first policy step should be to repeal Rhode Island's electric vehicle mandate. Then we have to reconsider other emission reduction goals. Our targets are simply not attainable. Net zero emissions by 2050 is not attainable. We've got to reconsider our state's overall goals. We should lift our nuclear moratoriums. You want safe, abundant, and low-cost energy? Nuclear is the way to go. We have to get over this 50-year-old no nukes fear. It's not logical. It's not justifiable from an experience point of view, from a technology point of view. We've come a long way in developing these small nuclear plants. We've got to lift the moratoriums, and these nuclear generators are the most efficient, low-cost way to produce electricity we know on Earth today. But yet we have moratoriums. Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont, we have substantial barriers to nuclear energy development. We've got to change all that. And we've got to allow nuclear to compete with renewables. It is renewable. It is green. It's safe for the environment. It's low cost and it's abundant. And at the same time, we've got to expand our regional natural gas pipeline capacity. Massachusetts governor has put a stop to certain ideas up there. Rhode Island, there's not much Rhode Island can do about it, but this is more of a regional thing. Of course, New York and Pennsylvania have where there's abundant because of fracking and all that in Pennsylvania. We all heard about that during the recent presidential campaign. Pennsylvania has right next door to New England. Pennsylvania has enormous amounts of natural gas capacity they could send our way, but yet state governments will not allow pipeline capacity to be increased. Natural gas is also a green energy source. At least I believe so, and so do many of the European nations. The same way. We've ruled it that. So just to conclude, folks, freezing in the dark is not where we want to be. Is not what we want for ocean state families. Our report highlights that. I'm going to do a deeper dive into the report with a guest, like I said, coming up in future weeks. And as we approach the 2025 legislative session, but we're going to make repeal of the electric vehicle mandate our number one priority because it's the lowest hanging fruit. It's the easiest one to do. It's the one that makes the least sense to keep on the books. You know, convincing Rhode Island lawmakers to do a reverse course and to abandon their climate change delusions. It's going to take a little more doing, but understanding that under this new presidential Trump administration, that based on our report, that based on our electric grid's limited capacity as it is, and based on the fact that nobody wants to buy electric vehicles, it's the lowest hanging fruit. It's the easiest step to take towards a more sane energy policy for our state of Rhode Island. So I know I rambled a bit, but look, this is probably the most important issue facing our state, our economy, and our families. Is affordable. We need energy to survive, especially up here in the Northeast. We need abundant, low-cost energy for families and businesses. And the path that Rhode Island lawmakers have set us upon right now leads us away from that goal. Again, the goal has to be for Rhode Island lawmakers when it comes to policy is to provide as much abundant, low-cost energy as possible to keep us safe, to keep us warm in the winter, to keep us cool in the summer, to power our lives. That should be the goal for Rhode Island government, to provide as much energy as possible, as low a cost as possible. But if we continue on this delusion that our goal should be to reduce carbon emissions as much as possible, then indeed, Rhode Islanders face the risk of freezing in the dark. All right, so that concludes our In the Dugout segment for today. I thank you for tuning in. Please spread the word. This is such an important issue. Our report highlights that. Again, more coming up on that in the future. So until next game, Mike Stenhouse out. We're in the dugout.